The Cautionary Adage. Maria came out into the sun of the church's lofty garden. It was not the rays of warm light that lifted the drowsiness wrought by the veil, but Adelaine, peeking up from behind the flowers to wave at her. She breathed a sigh of relief and walked over the grass. Alongside her sat two other women, endeavoring to introduce white roses to the garden, outfitted with gloves and aprons.
Beautiful day, Lady Maria.
Adeline sat up straight on her knees, shielding her eyes with her hand against the sun, looking up at her.
And beautiful flowers,
she responded.
Will you perhaps join us? There are some left, as you can see.
One of the other women pointed towards bags, still placed on a cart, filled with flowers ready to be planted in the soil.
It is good for you, my lady. The fresh wind and pleasant scent.
Just a short moment.
Oh, you must be better to allocate time to relax, Lady Maria. How else can one continue to work so hard? She's right. And even when you relax, you must work. Like now.
They giggled at Adeline's comment. Maria rolled her eyes while she was fetching one of the bags, where she also found a pair of gloves she put on.
I said I'll join you already. I don't need convincing. Sometimes you do. But I always listen. Fair. Oh, Adelaine.
One of the women stood up.
Did you catch Mr. Wind today?
She rolled her eyes and smirked.
Mr. sounds so stern for such a pleasant young man. I knew you would say that.
The third woman looked over the bush of budding roses at her.
I see you steal glances each time he works with us. Oh, stop. He's just one of the more polite ones. Always so talkative. Perhaps even more talkative with you.
Her blushing made the two exchange looks and snigger. Maria considered commenting on the state of their good mood and associated concerns with their continuous duties treating the ashen blood. She refrained from doing so despite how much it gnawed at her, partially due to how the issue had grown considerably more under control, but mostly attributed to how she saw them in the moment, and did not want to spoil it. Her attention was shallowly caught by another of the blood saints entering the garden. She only observed her heading in the direction of two other women just relaxing on a bench in the same garden. She turned her attention more fully upon hearing the woman yell angrily at one of them.
You hag! You are done talking behind my back, you hear?
The two women were caught in astonishment at her wrathful eruption. Maria stood up among the gawking saints and headed over.
I found out. Yes, I did. You snake. I demand...
Please, please. Maria interrupted her, and the woman spun around as if fearing for her life, eyes wide and taking stabbing breaths. The whites were red with veins, but overall the eyes seemed tired, unfocused, and her forehead was damp with sweat, making the black hair stick to it.
What is the matter? Lady Maria, you side with her?
Her voice went from angry to panicked.
There are no sides, dear. Tell me what has you upset.
She started scratching the top of her head absent-mindedly, but it quickly evolved into a frenzied clawing with both hands behind her ears.
Shut up! Shut up! Your voice echoes in my head. Why don't we sit down? I can't. My head hurts. It hurts terribly. Come with me then. I know just the way to make it better.
She reached for her, but her hands were swiped away, and a wild, angry expression returned to her.
You get away from me. You will just... I know what you'll do. Bring me to those terrible men. No. It will just be you and me. Don't try to trick me. I'm all alone. I thought you were nice. Not like the rest, but...
Her eyes had overflowed with tears, yet they remained glowing with ire.
I can't think with all this noise. You all are smothering me with the sounds.
She rushed away from Maria so quickly that she only managed one step in pursuit before she had leapt over the railing of the garden. She was entirely quiet while doing so, but Maria screamed out. The other woman shrieked with terror upon the sight. She threw herself against the stone railing so hard she could just as well tumble over herself. Down on the lower garden, she saw the woman laying crumpled, making jerking motions. She agonizingly slowly turned onto her back and aimed her face straight up before growing still, and had two clerics rush over to attend her situation. Maria tore herself away, not ready to witness the fate of the poor saint. In her head, the outcome was neither terrible nor fortunate, both equally true, which was much more preferable, with the risk of the former solely existing as a fact. Luna waved exaggeratedly to Maria as she saw her on the upper level of the research hall, herself and her following still ascending the great central stairwell. Naturally, with all the vocal buzzing of the space and due to how Luna never called out to her, the engaged greeting went unnoticed as the stoic lady of the research hall remained within her conversation with a random doctor. Luna picked up her pace, leaving her assistant and Carol behind as she hurried up the steps. When she stepped off and started walking along the 4th floor walkway, Maria saw her over the shoulder of the man she spoke with. She waved again, to which Maria just nodded. Reaching closer, she heard the conversation being wrapped up, and soon the doctor departed into a doorway on the side.
Your worries are over, my friend. Good, Luna. Some privacy?
She was incredibly curt, and not as elegant in her tone. Additionally, she noticed that the sides of her hair seemed a bit ruffled, and the darkness around her eyes was a bit more prevalent. She turned around and stepped in through the same door as the doctor. A corridor continued for a bit until it split off. They walked all the way down to the crossing, where Maria opened a double door just at a junction straight ahead of them. Luna turned and waved for her assistant to wait outside. Caelid followed her inside, and the door was shut. When she turned, she saw Maria sinking deep into a chair along the wall in the small office. It seemed to be an archive of sorts, and she had likely picked the chair closest to her. She hunched forward and rubbed her face, grunting.
The wait has been unbearable.
I know, darling, but I have the solution here.
Caelid stepped forward and knelt beside her, taking her hand.
Oh, Maria, it has been hard on you.
She nodded and composed herself, as best as she could, with a drawn-out breath. She did not seem to fully relax despite it.
It has. Curses. It's that plague. All that work that does it, I'm sure. Oh, I'm so sorry for you. How are you getting along? I see it more and more. Symptoms are growing and I fear it will become unpredictable. I won't have it. What if they become...
No.
Luna stopped her.
Don't even need to mention it. For my solution does not involve blood in the slightest. Oh, you love it. It's extraordinarily clever. And Caelid approves.
Maria looked at Caelid, almost pleadingly.
I do. But keep in mind that we have not been able to test it. No? Well, I suppose it's a quite extraordinary case. It is, but I believe in it. Everything adds up, and it is my understanding that two will match. Truly? You have been told so?
Caelid gave a very proud and genuine smile, while she nodded reassuringly to her friend.
I have.
It made Maria take another breath, which straightened her out in the chair.
All right. I want to hear it then.
Luna opened the door and her assistant entered. A younger man with neatly combed, curly brown hair and somewhat of a perpetual nervous face. He was holding a very overcrowded folder with the details.
Ah, this is Mikolash. So far the only one that can keep up with writing down my notes.
He smirked awkwardly and reached out a hand to Maria that she shook gingerly.
Very well. Good thing you are sitting down, because the details are... Oh, I don't really know how to be brief. You are at least aware of the work we have been doing with phantasms.
Maria nodded. She snapped with her fingers to Mikolash, who walked over to the desk to open up the folder.
We have found a way to breed more of them.
She paused to await him retrieving the proper papers, which were shortly placed into her hand.
Or create more, perhaps I should say. However, their longevity... I can barely call them alive to begin with. Anyhow, the extremely simplest of explanation is that our research has yielded that as in response to contact with the Holy Blood, which the Saints possesses a unique relationship with, the phantasms will relieve their theorized state of hysteria. In light of observations made on the frenzied patients, which you are well aware of, the introduction of phantasms will cause a symbiosis, much like that originally spotted on Cos. However, this will naturally be on a minor scale, since we only want to lessen the harmful effects that the blood very most likely is the cause of.
Maria finally took the paper after having absently stared while listening. Her eyes moved over the text rather quickly before looking up at her.
Do you think this could be used to treat the frenzy in anyone?
I find that hard to believe. The Saints, like I said, have a unique symbiosis with the old blood like no one else. Sure, traces will always remain after any type of administration, but the Saints adapt to it entirely. Therefore, I suggest the only counter-treatment to this is another form of symbiosis. It more or less explains itself, I think.
Carol stood up, bringing Maria's hand with her, prompting her to follow.
The procedure is very pleasant. They will have a comfortable place to lie down, while me and my colleagues tend to their sedation.
In what form? She sounded harshly skeptical, but Carol shook her head gently with a smile.
It is just a matter of focus. Proper imagery and sound will lull them comfortably into the right state. Then they will simply imbibe water.
Luna leaned towards them slightly, feeling she had to clarify.
The phantasms are in the water. It prolongs their individual longevity, and they are stimulated by certain sounds.
Huh. So they like music.
Carrie looked back at her with a humorous smirk, which Luna returned.
They sure do. I can show you the rune and instruments if you'd like.
She nodded to Carol's proposition, and the two of them left the room. Luna glanced back at Mikolash, who was putting back the paper into the folder.
Would you make a list with every blood saint?
Certainly. Right away.
I'll pull some people from here and there. Then we'll create a profile for this saintly sickness.
It would soon be Vera's first year in the research hall. It had been arduous, true, but rewarding. However, arduous in the moral sense. Before, she had simply been a nurse employed at a clinic that actually lay on the same street as the town hall, a point of interest she was sure to bring up as to give more credit to her past, although it was now behind her for a higher calling. To properly treat illness and disease, one must know their cause. There were those, like her past self, that relied on old and faithful methods. But then again, there were always things that could be executed on with greater proficiency, but were often not uncovered due to the obscurity conformity brought. Now she proudly and experienced strode through the place where healing was constantly moving forward, feeling properly fulfilled with her career's development. Today the thought occurred to her just how long she had been part of the venerable institution of the Healing Church. She reflected on the trivial things she thought improper during her first month. How blood healing was administered so liberally on patients. She had thought it frightening at first from a sympathetical standpoint, to be treated by a method not yet definitively proven to be a cure. But she had come to change her opinion by seeing said patients, specifically the states they were in prior to their treatment. Being so near sickness even before her current employment, the effect was startling enough to deem the effort worthy. If the outcome was not clear enough, the sense of hope alone made the blood superior to any form of remedy. The healing blood did not just cleanse any illness, condition or physical trauma, but also banished the worry from the spectators. After all, she herself had grown much more at ease having the blood around, knowing would anything befall her, it would be a most trivial thing for the blood to overcome. She was walking down the stairs, prepared for her lunch break, when there erupted a commotion down a hallway on the floor she just passed. It was the specific floor that made her weary, as many sounds had recently come from there. Sounds that once again, after so much time in the research hall, tickled at her moralization. The floor where blood saints were treated for their strange hysteria. Now though, it sounded like something urgent and unforeseen. Voices grunted lowly and bodies were pushed against both furniture and equipment. No words, to her knowledge, were spoken. She rushed towards the sound, past many doors. While doing so, she could not help but find it somewhat odd she was the only one pursuing the sounds. An open door led to the source, into a spacious room with tables and shelves along the walls, and a single operating table comfortably outfitted right in the middle. On one side stood 2 men, on the other a woman dressed in a patient garb. They stared down one another like prey and hunter. The room overall looked properly thrashed. She stood for a few tense seconds until one of the orderlies threw themselves to the side and around towards the woman. The patient let out a strange, mumbled scream. It was like a child's babbling, no words but several incoherent pronunciations of sounds. It sounded completely deranged, but also as a call for distress.
Hey now! Calm down for God's sake!
Vera threw herself into the room, trying to step between the 2 orderlies and the patient. She succeeded, but mostly due to invoking surprise in the 2 men. Once they had stopped, so did the patient.
Calm down, everyone! What in the world?
She looked accusingly at the 2 in front of her. The patient was heard making slow and random tapping sounds of her bare feet behind her as she stepped in place.
She needs to calm down. We are not done.
They kept looking astonished, while throwing tense glances over her shoulder.
Now, what has her so upset?
She looked over her shoulder at the woman who seemed almost paralyzed in her frantic expression, keeping her eyes focused and manically centered on nothing. She was slowly rocking her entire body side to side.
Hello, miss? Do you hear me? She doesn't. Now, who are you? Are you even supposed to be here? Excuse me?
She straightened her back and placed her fists on her hips, once again facing the two, who now had rather accusatory grimaces.
I believe I am, and what you are doing seems only to aggravate the patient. Pardon you, but it's simply the symptoms of the saint's hysteria. And chasing a patient around like children is most definitely not the proper treatment. Look here, lady.
One of them took a step closer to her, waving a finger around. His appearance was that of a learned man in his middle ages, glasses, beard and everything a proper scholar archetype would possess.
We are here to do our job, one that can only be executed with precision and thoroughness. Now, the patient here has decided to go on a tantrum, utterly ruining our workplace. Now, if you are not here to properly sedate her, you might as well leave.
She was about to return the scolding when Lady Maria suddenly walked past in the open doorway, a timid woman in tow. She glanced inside, cold-faced as usual, but widened her eyes at what she saw. The two orderlies now turned to see her come inside, while the patient had begun mumbling to herself in a self-reassuring fashion where she stood.
By the... What are you doing?
The tall and imposing woman practically roared at them.
Oh, Lady Maria, apologies. There were some complications with the procedure that...
This complex? And how do you explain the state of the patient?
Suddenly and with full composure, like putting on a mask, her face and tone became gentle and she turned to the other woman.
Would you continue down to the very end and wait in the room on the left? I need to attend to this matter really quickly. Then I'll join you. Oh, of course. I'll just...
She stumbled away and out the door. Then Lady Maria conjured back the passionate anger once aimed at them.
I cannot possibly recall her in such a state this morning. How typical of some. The disregard. The depravity.
Retaining her burning, pale eyes at them, she walked over to the mumbling woman.
Hush now. Can you hear me?
She took hold of her hand with both of hers. She instantly grew silent and focused on her, relaxed and nodded.
What happened? Did something go wrong? I became scared. It was so much. Oh, I get shivers. All right then. I'll take you down to rest. No, I will. I want to.
Suddenly she had become completely sober, just like any sane patient, only appearing slightly unnerved by a new treatment.
Oh? Are you certain?
I am.
Lady Maria threw one skeptical look at them. When she looked at the patient, there was the most extreme form of silent somberness in her eyes.
All right. It might still be a bit uncomfortable.
That's all right. I was just scared. But I'm ready to try again. It's not real after all.
She nodded, then turned to the rest.
Vera, what are you doing here? My lady, I heard the commotion and rushed over. If I may, what?
She was silenced by the lady's flat hand.
Was there any development?
She turned to the two men.
No, not significantly. The mystic had just left when she developed the episode.
She made a deep sigh and rubbed her eyes with her fingers.
Vera, I know this must seem strange, but I might need your help.
Certainly.
Would you remain during this procedure? Just to comfort the patient should she need it. I would explain more afterwards, but right now I have other matters to attend to.
Say no more. I'm right on it, my lady.
Lady Maria nodded, turning to look at the patient where she had laid down, then walked to the door.
All right. It seems you will accompany us for the remainder of the process.
The man sounded surprised, but not bothered. He walked over to the bed, and the other man began to clean up.
Are we fine for now? Or do we need to call the mystic back?
He asked the patient.
It's fine. I'll try and endure the rest, but try not to be so loud.
The man nodded and walked over to one of the tables where several vials of clear liquid stood. Vera was now rather excited and intrigued at what was to follow. The man returned with one of the vials and tipped it over for the patient to start drinking from. She wondered if it was some kind of special substance. While they proceeded to empty the entire contents, Vera looked over at the door. Lady Maria had lingered with a forlorn stare at them. Something in her eyes made that moral code return in Vera's mind. Much needed to be done in science if new treatments were to save lives. Some were at times questionable, but in her experience the real crime was to do nothing. She favored the adage of one needs to break a few eggs to make an omelette. But how many had already been broken before Lady Maria's eyes, for her to have such a saddened gaze? Adeline stared out through the open window, smelling the scent of wet grass. There we are. All of a sudden, Mr. Wynne had retrieved the needle, now removing the narrow vial from the extracting instrument and putting a lid on it, placing it in a holder. She had almost forgotten entirely that he was drawing blood. That seems... He turned over some flasks so we could see their labels. Dolores, Frida, and... seems like it. He remarked absently, and tied a little note around her vial, labeling it with her name. Then he leaned back and slapped his hands on his knees, sighing in exaggerated relief. That would be all for now. I'll have these looked over later.
What are they serving towards?
These are for examinations. Her eyes sunk down to her shoes, peeking out beneath the brown dress.
Oh, for the sickness.
Well, yes.
Can you see anything?
We try. We are at least gonna look. She braced against the armrest and stood up, while he remained seated. I hope it does not bother you too greatly. I can only imagine how it would feel. She stopped herself from approaching the door.
I don't know what to think, but can I be forward with you?
Of course. She turned around.
I am a bit frightened, but I don't feel worried. Perhaps that sounds strange. I mean that I feel safe here, with Lady Maria and many of you.
He smiled, seemingly taken back a bit. I'm glad, and Lady Luna seems very optimistic from the results.
Is it working? You know, do they become normal?
He tilted his head slightly. They seem to. Well, I wouldn't want to hold back on you. It is not a finished concept yet from what I gather. But it does seem to have a positive effect. And don't you worry too much. Some of you might very well never know these symptoms.
Can our blood tell you why?
I firmly believe so, yes.
Because, well, I wouldn't want to speak ill of kind Lady Maria, but I think she deliberately speaks little of it. That it is our blood that causes it.
He appeared torn for a moment, looking at the vials, then up into the roof. Haha, it's, well, it is.
It does not anger me, just so you know. The girls and I knew from the start. But we have faith you good clerics will overcome it. I wouldn't want to let the church down. None of us would.
The woman lay her head down onto the pillow. Caryll sat beside her on the daybed, an upgrade from the somewhat clumsily less fancy alternative of the patient table. The woman's shoulders were still tensely kept high, and her brow upturned in mild worry, her fingers fidgeting over her chest as she tried to appear relaxed.
Take a few breaths. Perhaps close your eyes.
She did so, but opened them quickly once Caryll stood to light the candle behind the paper frame, placed on a tall lamp foot at the end of the daybed. On it was a deep sea rune, a symbol of a central line with another that crossed over it. The horizontal crossing line sprawled out into 3 vertical ones placed beside one another on both sides of the center, progressively growing in length, looking like a tree or sprawling wings. The glow of the candle lit up the black marking on the paper background, with a hole right at its center for the candlelight to shine straight through. She returned to the chair, and the light maintained steady, never flickering.
Look ahead. Focus on it with me.
For a moment her eyes briefly averted from the rune sporadically, but eventually the sensation washed over her, and her eyes remained fixed on it, as well as them growing a bit more drowsy looking. At that point, Carrie leaned over the small table right beside her and struck the tuning fork with a metal stick, producing a tone that at first felt a bit aggravating to the ears, but quickly transitioned into a pleasantly merging with the room. The patient never seemed to react the slightest. The specific tone evolved into sounding like it was shifting in volume, like how the sound of waves increase and decrease by the ebbing properties. It was, however, an illusion created by the impression of the deep sea rune.
You are out at sea. The water is neither warm nor cold against your skin. You need not swim, for you do not sink. You can move as you wish, for you are like the waves. The water is still and only moves when you move. There are no waves, and the sky is white with wavy clouds. You are alone with the sea. This is not your domain, but it can be.
On the same table, she retrieved one of the vials with the phantasm water. There was nothing about its appearance that spoke about its additional properties. As she brought it to the patient's mouth, she slowly averted her eyes to look at it, but her demeanor did not change. Upon tilting the vial, the woman formed her mouth to receive the liquid and drank it all.
The sea is deep, pleasant and welcoming. Embrace its protection and submerge yourself below the still surface. Down here, everything becomes quiet. You hear the great body of water. The silence echoes like a voice around you, bidding you welcome. You are safe here. The ocean is arms cradling you from any woes. The current is a voice speaking to you, comforting you.
She took the second flask and let the patient drink again. When Carol walked out, she found only Luna sitting by the center table in the room where doors lined the walls to isolated treatment chambers. Mikolash was sitting by a desk along the opposite wall with his back to them, writing. Luna was also writing in a notebook, while her attention was aimed at another book propped up in front of her. He looked over his shoulder and quickly stood up, fastening a blank, lined paper to a handboard, and headed towards her, giving a smiling nod as he entered through the door behind her. Carol sheepishly remained by the door a moment longer, before deciding to sit herself down opposite Luna. Her friend did not react to her doing so.
So,
She finally spoke hesitantly.
the results seem good?
Mm-hmm. Luna hurriedly wrote something before looking up at her, placing the pen aside.
They match good enough with the procedure, although some cases have shown resurging episodes.
Oh no, truly?
Mm-hmm.
But since not that many have experienced this case, I am starting to fall under the impression it might simply be stress of recent times. You know, with the plague, and that the taking of blood might have stimulated or it is a certain blood type. We cannot discount it to be a more severe form of frenzy, however.
Caryll nodded. It, being a form of beastly manifestation, did not seem particularly plausible. For whatever reason would the saints, out of all, experience such a particular form of ailment? Then again, since they were somewhat successful in remedying it, the alluring prospect of uncovering a cure for the frenzied patients was almost overbearing. That is to say, if the two even shared the same origin of emergence. Mikolash returned, quietly closing the door and now with a paper filled with notes. He walked back to his desk and resumed his work. Shortly thereafter, one of Caryll's students that had volunteered for the project emerged from one of the doors. She stood up and she approached while Mikolash repeated what he had done upon Caryll's surfacing into the hall.
How was it?
She spoke lowly, as if they had the resting patient right beside them.
It went fine, Master Caryll. She was a bit reluctant at first, but I managed. Oh my, how very good of you. But there was never the possibility of an episode. I don't think so. She just seemed nervous when I brought out the rune.
Luna perked up behind them.
Did she seem agitated? No. Like I said, she seemed more so worried about the experience. Very calm the entire time.
She nodded and looked briefly into her notes.
Okay. I'm still a bit worried, honestly, that one of these sessions will trigger an episode because of the reaction to the rune. It's a rather compelling experience, after all. Oh, Luna, I assure you it is the most soothing experience.
She raised her eyebrows, which was indicative enough of her skepsis. She had a tendency to bundle every rune into the same category, when in reality each was as unique as an individual, if not more so. And the deep sea rune, to Caryll's own mind, created like a barrier around the mind where no anxiety or stress could penetrate. But Luna still appeared somewhat distrusting of it, only because there existed cases where runes could become downright revolting. A door flung open, and emerging was another of Caryll's associates, with a perplexing look on her face.
I might need some help.
Luna shot up in her seat.
What is going on?
The woman was quick to make calming motions with her hands.
It's nothing that dramatic. Just, the patient started talking.
They all looked at one another. Luna lowered herself slowly back into her seat.
Oh, I thought something was wrong. Apologies, but the things she's saying, I have a hard time coming to sense with it. Perhaps you could help, Master Caryll.
Luna stood up again and started walking around the table.
Well, mundane as it appears, it is quite a development. Have you ascertained that her state is fully unconscious? It is, Lady Luna. It's like she's talking in her sleep, but she was speaking with me.
Luna raised an eyebrow. Mikolash emerged from the room, and Luna snapped her fingers at him.
Go fetch Lady Maria, would you?
He straightened his back and threw away his notes onto the long table, and in the next moment he had vanished, expediently quickly. Thereafter she made an exhausted sigh before she and Caelid entered the chamber. Inside, the candles behind the rune frame was still glowing, but the patient seemed fast asleep. 2 empty vials stood on the table, and everything in the darkened room seemed to imply a successful effort. However, the woman on the daybed was moving her lips as if talking. It did not suggest a complete string of sentence, as she would mouth a few syllables before growing completely still a moment. They all stared at her lips to try and discern exactly what she said, but they moved sluggish enough for it to be difficult, and with the pauses in mind, it started to appear more and more like a dialogue. Like she was talking to someone, and the pause was when some unknown participant vocalized itself. But it seemed almost eruptive, the way she suddenly slurred out an unheard and likely incomprehensible string of words. Having glared long enough, the patterns started to appear more like random twitches in her lips than anything else.
You.
She suddenly whispered, but grew silent while they all stared at each other.
You there.
Again she spoke in a voice verging on a sleep-drunken slur. They all approached to stand at her side. Luna gingerly reached out a hand to feel at her pulse. Then she mouthed the word sleeping with bewildered eyes.
Hush. Do you hear it? There must be someone here. But I can't see. Can't find them.
The woman that had initially called them into the room leaned and whispered to them.
See what I mean? What?
The sleeping woman said. Luna made an annoyed grimace and reached over her hand to pull back the eyelid. The eye was vacantly staring into the ceiling, and she did not react. She then moved the hand to hold it under her nose, feeling for her breathing before leaning back.
Miss?
She asked, but the woman did not respond in any fashion.
There is someone here.
She finally spoke again.
The howl of the sea. It speaks. Wait a moment. What does it say?
The mystic asked.
I don't understand it. It's my mother's voice, calling from outside. It's all muffled from the water. It's asking that be born.
Sorry, miss, but the fun is over,
Luna said while nudging her shoulder. She did not react.
I can't hear properly. Is someone there besides the mother?
Luna froze. With trembling eyes, she looked back at Caelid. The look she was given almost made her knees give out at the memories it invoked.
What, Mother?
Luna asked in a frightening whisper.
What was that? Is there someone else here? The Mother. Who is it?
Her eyes began to flicker open. She shot up with wide eyes and looked around in silent terror. Her breathing increased until she was heaving.
Keep calm, please. It's all right. You were dreaming.
Carol carefully reached out her hands to her, but did not touch her. The woman shook her head, then fixed her eyes onto her. It suddenly appeared like she for a moment could not draw in air, like she was choking. She leaned over, and they stepped out of her way as her stomach emptied itself onto the floor, consisting mostly of the imbibed water. She continued to heave, and Carol lay her arms around her.
There. Are you all right?
She nodded. She wiped her mouth with her hand.
Sorry. I was... Where am I?
She looked up at them.
I'm not me. No. I don't understand. You were talking to us just now. Remember?
She sat up with her feet over the edge.
It sounded almost like you were pulling a prank on us.
The woman looked utterly absent.
The water of the womb. What was that? I don't know. It was an ocean. It's just a great womb.
Whose womb? Luna leaned down, looking on the verge of breaking down with her wide eyes.
Whose? Not someone. There were stars there. Many stars. But I don't know how It was just like someone told me. Just now. Or did I always know?
Carol looked at Luna, who maintained her eyes maniacally fixed at the confused woman.
A name. Was there a name? Huh? The Mother. Was it yours? Or someone else's? Oh, I thought it was mine. Then it turned out it was. 'Cause
Mother of... Damn this hand! Jura flung the cards on the table in defeat. It's not about the cards, you know. His victorious opponent spoke calmly.
Well, this time it was the cards. Just look at your score. It must be luck.
If you say so. What of it, George? Wanna try your luck? He said cheekily, but George looked out over the bushes from their table, towards the center garden of the workshop and beyond. He mumbled something in response that just barely was interpreted as a no.
Ah, we slacked enough. Perhaps there are more goings on.
Dura stood up and walked towards the workshop building, with the other two catching up. The garden was empty, save for Vitus conversing with one of the undercover hunters, dressed as a beggar. The three of them naturally were drawn towards the allure of the conversation's contents. Just as they walked up, the hunter glanced over at them and left, leaving Vitus where he stood.
What was that about?
The veteran hunter looked towards George, then away, blankly staring as if falling asleep with his eyes open. Oh? No, it's... He trailed off and had something bewildering come over his face.
It's not too bad news, Master.
He refocused and looked into their eyes more firmly.
Huh? Perhaps it is a sign, lads. They are harder to keep track of. It worries me.
But are they not becoming more predictable? I mean, some start to develop clear signs.
Vitus now appeared disturbed, or perhaps irritated at them.
Yeah, sure. Clear, but not clear enough until it's too late.
Was it something of the like just now?
Dura asked and looked towards the direction the hunter had vanished.
A man is acting up. Might do something he regrets soon.
We'll take care of it.
George was quick to offer. Their master raised an eyebrow under his brimmed hat and face cover.
We'll do a perfect job. We split up and get him at his house. No one will ever make the connection. He'll just disappear like everyone else.
It requires patience, George. The case is not fully confirmed. But I wouldn't want one man to be there for the worst. Not a task one gives and accepts lightly.
At first, Dura looked at George with slight surprise as his friend seemed nearly eager to get underway. It had been a slow day and he too was restless, but there was some doubt lingering for the task. But nevertheless, he mustered the courage to prove himself.
We can handle it, Master. We've hunted plenty of this. Like you said, it is a sign of the times. We should adapt to it.
With apparent reluctance, but also with something akin to relief, he nodded and quietly approved.
He was just entering the Great Market Bridge on the central side. Minimal physical signs, but not non-existent. He also has a background of experimental, work-related vigor administrations. Ask the stalkers on the spot if you can't find him. He is apparently hard to miss.
With that, he sighed and left to enter the little workshop building. The three of them entered the storage and quickly donned their long coats so their trick weapons were not as conspicuous in daylight. From the workshop, it was not far to one of the great bridges that linked the cathedral ward with the rest of Yarnum over the old valley hamlet. On the opposite side was a wide street where traders, farmers and artisans not so much sold their products as making connections and keeping relations with other businesses, as well as providing regular services for establishments or private persons. In the bustling mass of people, everyone was more blind to their presence than during the night. As soon as they stepped off the Grand Bridge, George's behavior grew too abnormal to ignore. He had no subtlety, but walked conspicuously and cast aggravating glances everywhere. Jura laid a firm hand on his shoulder and drew him back slightly.
Come on, man. What's with you lately? You might get away with this during the nights, but now...
George did not acknowledge him, but did slow down and calmed a bit. After a time of scanning the place, Jura soon saw a large man, probably a laborer or carpenter, standing in one of the meat stands and arguing loudly. His hair was long and loosely tied behind his head, resembling more a lion's mane than a human haircut. He waved and gestured broadly as he berated the butcher, who appeared much more timid in comparison. He sure was noticeable, but folks around him did not pay much heed, save for remarking glances on his loud volume. Jura bumped his two companions' shoulders and indicated towards him. He was about to speak up about what had been established back at the workshop when George promptly marched forward towards the loud and large man. He walked quickly, and due to how stunned his reaction left the two of them, he managed to reach the man even before they had started after him.
Is there a problem here?
George inquired in an authoritarian voice. The man stopped his rant and turned to the small individual next to him. The anger from before did not recede with the shift of attention.
Get lost, pipsqueak!
He roared and started turning his head back away from him.
You ought to calm down, sir. You would not want me to hurt you now.
The man grew more furious and shifted his pose to fully face him.
What you say?
You should calm down and leave him alone, lest I do something horrible to you.
George.
Jura started as he came up behind him, but managed little else. The man aimed a full body push with both hands, but quick as he was, George spun to the side and must have managed to slice up the man's hip from under his coat with a scythe. A faint splatter of blood jumped from the man as he stumbled forward and grasped at his side. Both Jura and the other had jumped back to be missed by his forward momentum. He turned back at his attacker and screamed in anger before charging at him, seemingly unfazed by the wound. The scythe clicked and folded out of hiding, slicing upwards along the man's side as he stepped back. More blood flew upwards along the blade's travel, and the man stumbled over to land on his stomach. With the scythe folded out from the handle, he started to swipe and stab wildly into the man's back where he lay. The mass of people around them started panicking into a cacophony that grew louder and louder until every sound seemed to simply fade out as Jura looked upon his friend continuing to butcher what by now surely was but a corpse. While he stood there, the other hunter leapt upon George and dragged him off. His bare face was red with blood. Jura stepped up to the corpse of the man with pooling blood beneath. He peered at his eyes, but it was hard to tell. he heard behind him, in the silence of the market, how George was berated upon. He looked around at the people who stared in shock and horror. He did not know what to say. As soon as the ink marked the end of the last sentence and left the paper's surface, he stretched out his arms above his head, so the cracks were not only audible, but felt like the bones moved within him. He peered over the pile next to him on the wide table and let out a sigh. The work of a Healing Church transcriber was never finished, and he pondered taking a break, just to activate the entirety of his body, so as to prohibit the fear of petrification. Just when he placed the paper on the left pile, he glimpsed the document at the top and remembered. It had sparked his curiosity, for a scholar of Mensis had apparently brought it in the company of one of the Healing Church mystics. The pair had not stressed it to be rushed, only that it was a discovery Mensis had made relevant to the blood, and that per protocol it ought to pass through them firstly. A mundane task in itself, but it was often a bit exciting to gain insight, if only as a momentary change of topic, into what Mensis was currently working with. Then the pair had also been striking to him. Unlike every other piece that came through in piles, this specific document had arrived by hand. They had knocked on his door with the object of interest and desired it to be transcribed. It was unusual that individual pieces would arrive in such a fashion, but then again it may just as well have been dropped on its way to him. He decided to stand up and walk in a short circle on the rug in his little office, and then continue with the piece before taking a much-deserved break. He sat back down and placed the bundle of papers, tied with a simple string, next to the desk lamp. Although there was a window right in front of him by the table, the cloudy sky did not illuminate his work to satisfaction. The first page was immediately striking to him, with its entirety being covered by rows of glyphs that were unknown to him. They did resemble the little he had seen of the far southern Sichi writings, but it was an ancient and outdated language. Along the first page lay a brief note that simply instructed, "Separate and categorize," referred to the weird accounts of the Necropolis lexicon. He looked over at the bookshelf lining the entirety of his right wall. It took him a moment, but he found that a copy had indeed been supplied to him, even with the rare chance of its usage in mind. As transcriber of the Healing Church's clerics, many assignment passed through his door, from simple copying to reworks and compilations of scattered notes. Translation was nothing new to him, but looking through the 17 papers he had received, he found nothing more in the likes of a secondary instructory note. It caused his brow to sink into a frown, and he leaned over behind him, skidding with his chair along the floor to reach the massive lexicon. Flipping through the pages made him none the wiser, for the task to translate symbols that at first appearance appeared only loosely based on a minor grammatical branch seemed well beyond his duties. Besides, he was familiar with the referred literature, more resembling a work of fiction, clearly being credited to be sourced from a mad scholar. Despite its questionable source, the discovery of the Meru had given it some intriguing relevance. Closing the book loudly, he stood and reached for the doorknob. Perhaps this had been meant for someone else who could fathom more with such a simple note, appearing more like a reminder to someone in the know. He exited into the silent corridor, with only the subtle sound of many other pens touring over papers behind closed doors. He walked not far until a face peeked around the corner by the end. The mystic from before stood and walked to meet him. He smiled awkwardly and waved with the paper note.
Sorry, but, yes. Oh, yes. It might appear confusing. I know.
She arrived close to him and took hold of his free hand and started to rub it with both of her own, while looking straight into his eyes. She smiled pleasantly and the large, blue eyes nearly shimmered. He was speechless, but she waited for him to gather himself while continually stroking his hand warmly.
I found it strange. I just... The papers? Yes.
She briefly looked down at the note which hung at his side in a limp grip.
What seems to be the problem, dear?
I was just wondering, is there something else?
She looked back at him and smiled wider.
No. Worry not, dear. Apologies. We might not have been fully clear earlier. There might be some translation work to be done.
She looked slightly embarrassed and peered off to the sides.
Oh, that's no problem, my lady. I'm used to it. It was only that I was uncertain for a moment.
He reassured her, and once again she looked back at him, into him, spreading a warm feeling.
Oh, how fortunate. The symbols, dear. They are fickle, but I'm sure you will solve their puzzle. Yes, that's it. A puzzle, right?
Right. The note, yes, I understand now.
They stood still for a moment, as he was hesitant to retrieve his hand, thinking he would become very cold without her touch. His fears, however, proved to be unfounded when she released him, smiled heartily and walked down the corridor. He promptly returned to his office with new determination. Back into his chair, he opened up the grammar book and placed the first paper next to it, with a hovering finger above it. Soon his hand slumped to the table's surface when the dismay set in. The glyphs of the documents had very little in common with the Sichi, much less so than he initially had thought. But unlike before, he did not despair long, and bolstered with the encouragement of the woman in mind, he turned to the registry of the book pertaining to every grammatical structure and individual letter, as well as composition. The enigmatic piece he had received consisted of solitary glyphs and asymmetrical shapes, each and every one being composed with many lesser shapes creating a larger whole. But there were clear distinctions between them. While the strange new symbols were a single composition, the Sichi script had the more familiar style of lining the letters, albeit that they were merged together to create different pronunciations and spaces only emerged between words, not letters. Evidently, the two did not share the same grammatical structures, which further puzzled him in regards to the reference. What the meanings of the glyphs could be and their origin he did not know, for he had only received a note and nothing more in his interactions with its deliverers. On the first row, which structurally differed little from the others, he began inspecting the first glyph. At first impression it came off as confusing, almost as if it had been a scholar's doodle in the margins of his notebook. But it was not without its gracefulness, as it appeared to have been methodically designed. Each shape was rather distinguishable, two circles being at the core, with them overlapping each other, positioned diagonally in relation to each other. Within them, and extending beyond, was curving lines that would take on many different forms, making the whole thing almost appear like a flower, with all the ends of the lines as petals. Many of the other glyphs were similar to this foundation, but varied in how many circles they possessed and the amount of line work. Some even had additional triangles and squares with less lines of curving nature in favor of more symmetrical angles. It was this adherence to base symmetry that caught his attention, and he pondered that it might hold some significance. As it was, the shapes provoked little stimulation, and he switched to examine the lexicon for further similarities. When an undetermined amount of time had passed, he peered out through his window, feeling how his neck had stiffened upon turning up from his incredibly slouched posture as he pored over the tome. The sun had moved considerably from its zenith, and now lay to herald the very first rays of orange over the heaven. It did not strike him, for he felt the mystery was soon to be unlocked. Upon just spending mere moments back into the grammatical world, he believed himself to find the first similarity to the first glyph. Each curved line, if examined closely within the circle it inhabited, did resemble a specific combination of letters. Dark, as it read, and he shot up in excitement. Hastily he threw forth a sheet of paper to start taking notes. More words were uncovered if examining the encircled spaces and the lines within. Then in the shapes outside the circles, like if they were borders. If he followed the line work into the other circle, it would uncover another composition, old. Following the same beginning of the line and taking a turn at a crossing also made up a new phrase, shell. He noted that each line that lay in the joined spaces of the two circles only made up nouns. After having looked back and forth to the paper and the book, writing down more and more words, it struck him how entirely new meanings could be extracted depending on the spaces between the words. He could feel how his eyes had widened, and the more he looked, the more phrases and words did he seem to uncover, noting feverishly on his paper. Before he knew it, he had moved on to the next glyph. He blinked his eyes to escape from the writs that had captured all of his faculties and examined his notes. The words lay in chaos, and beneath lay several notes regarding their connection to each other, their grammatical category, context of their nuances and such. But they did not spell out the entirety of a true meaning that he heavily suspected still lay locked within the glyph, but he just couldn't wait to uncover the next. The new glyph held 4 circles, one and all with an even more complex system of lines. He threw a careful glance onto the lower rows, holding entirely new shapes. Then he peered over at the next pages, where the glyphs started to grow to encompass the whole page. Suddenly he raised his head to see that everything was dark outside the window. He noted it only briefly before turning to the unending mysteries that by now seemed to unravel themselves before his eyes, pouring into him truths about things he never considered. Maedis first began to truly frighten her when she saw him sitting next to the poor madman with an eerily similar posture and mannerism. Like how the incoherently whispering and twitching cleric who with an arching backbone sat over his desk with his face glued to the surface, so did Maedis to his notebook, occasionally turning up his head as he wrote. She wondered what must have driven him to do what he did. Perhaps she ought to have asked herself, or him for that matter, much earlier.
Perhaps we should get him some water.
No need. He won't drink it. Maedis adjusted his round glasses on the wrinkled nose as he looked down once more to his writings.
Well, he needs to drink, no?
There is no time. See to it if you will. I must gather everything before something unpredictable happens.
She twisted in her seat. The man whose hand she had been soothing the day before was much more different, and she listened intently for every uttering he made. A bit of drool had fallen onto the pages, as he never closed his mouth in the perpetual mumbling.
The glyphs are becoming... well...
She pointed at the paper, and only then did he look up and over the shoulder of the cleric. Casually he stood and reached from behind him to slowly remove the papers. The mad cleric's voice grew louder and the face turned up at the window. He emitted a loud and monotone groan, originating so deep from within his throat, it sounded like he willfully wanted the organ damaged. Maedis reluctantly slid back the paper between his forearm, laying on the table. The head slowly turned back down to consume whatever it was that he gained.
Gods.
What? You won't be needing them again.
As a reference, I would prefer not to copy them anew.
He sat back down and flipped open his notes.
Have you been down south, Maedis?
She asked absent-mindedly, while dreamingly observing the mad wreck. He muttered before answering.
Yes, actually.
Do they know of the Thumerians there?
Not as much as we do today. Once they likely did.
Why is that?
He peered vexingly over at her, then at the man, then back at her.
Once, a man found something relating to Thumeru. Or at least that is the only conclusion. For what he went to write can only be about that place. But he did so in a fashion never before seen. Oh, the mad scholar.
Now it was Maedis that sounded as if taken by dreaming ambition, with a hint of amazement and admiration.
No one could of course understand him, shunned in his own time as he was. Oh, but the knowledge of that madman, the things he would herald. Oh, I hope he knew how important his message would be. To have been touched by such wisdom, and to go on and bless us with its fragments. Never would I have manifested these glyphs without his legacy, and he had to sacrifice his sanity for it. Now it is I that have it in lucid form. The vicar can no longer deny the blessing it holds.
He waved about, near frantically with his notes.
Once he sees this, oh my dear, then the eldritch truth will be within shorter reach.
He turned his otherwise frowned wrinkled face into a genuine smile, springing only from pure joy. She shared it with him, despite him feeling very alien to her, for she could still not comprehend his ambition, and she instead went back to quietly listening, within her own mind, to the soft and sweet, addictive utterances that played along with the ramblings of the mad cleric.
Old hunter cap. Old hunter cap with a wide brim that hides their sharp gaze. In the old days, when hunters were 10 a penny, this was part of their standard garb.